بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم آمين. وبعد. We continue with Safinatul Najat by Sheikh Salim ibn Abdullah al-Hadrami rahimahullah. ونفعنا الله بعلومه في الدارين آمين. We're on page 52, and the author in this section, the past two nights we've been talking about, or the past two classes we spoke about a kind of really detailed description about how to perform salah and the rulings about the parts of salah. And so for those of us who want to know how to pray correctly and all kind of the sunan and the details of prayer, refer to those durus and refer to the text in the book. Today we're going to get on to very specifics regarding Fatihah, specifics regarding Takbirat-ul-Ihram, specifics regarding Tashahhud, and so on and so forth. So we're not looking at the Salah as a whole, but we're looking at just parts of Salah, and we're really trying to look at the specifics of each part. And so that's what we're going to really be diving into. And I think it should be fairly fast. It won't be too long. Some of it is going to be, kind of self-evident. It doesn't need too much explanation. So inshallah we'll go through this and inshallah ta'ala cover these details. So the first part, the author rahimahullah on 51, he speaks about the degrees of intention. And so he says if the salah is fard, it is compulsory to intend three things. The act of salah, and then the actual salah. You name the salah that you're praying, and you also identify that it's a wajib, fard salah. So for a wajib salah, you have to intend three things. For example, Isha, pray, usalli, fard al-Isha. Three things, right? You mentioned the actual action, the verb, usalli, or I pray. Fard, meaning obligatory, and Isha, the name of the prayer. So that's the first degree of intention, is the intention for a fard salah. The second degree is an intention for a rawatib. And these are specific, these are sunan, so sunnah prayers that are very specific. The sunnah of dhuhr, the sunnah of maghrib, the sunnah of isha, so on and so forth. The rawatib and intent or sunan that have a specific cause. What is the sunnah that has a specific cause? Entering the masjid. The sunnah after wudu. These have specific causes that cause them, and therefore you're praying. So for these ibadat, what do you need to intend? The salah, the act of salah, and then the name of the salah. You just say, usalli sunnah, sunnat al-dhuhr. Usalli sunnat al-wudu. Usalli sunnat tahiyyat al-masjid. Or usalli tahiyyat al-masjid. You don't have to add sunnah. Usalli tahiyyat al-masjid. You don't have to mention if it's wajib or sunnah. All you say is the action and also the name of the salah. And then the last, if it's a mutlaq sunnah, mutlaq nafil. What does mutlaq nafil mean? It means that you're praying sunnah without any specific cause. And a lot of people think that people aren't used to praying sunnah for no specific cause. They're used to that, when I pray sunnah, there's a cause. There's a specific sunnah that I'm trying to pray. But that's not always necessary. A person can simply pray two sunnah because they want to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, two sunnahs. Right? Just like you want to read the Quran, you read the Quran. It's an ibadah. And diversifying ibadah is a good thing because naturally as human beings, we get very bored. We get bored fast. Right? So you pray salah a little bit, you make dhikr a bit, you use your, and then you make tilawatul Quran, and then you go help a Muslim brother, and you help serve the masjid. All of this is dhikr and ibadah. But you have to mix it up. Why? Because if you just do one, after a while, you're going to get tired and fatigued, and you're going to experience boredom, right? And so this is one of the ways to diversify your ibadah, is sometimes you just pray some extra sunnah. You have some extra time, you stand up to pray some extra sunnah. No specific reason. You just want to pray extra sunnah, right? And so, subhanAllah, this is something that, we like to kill time by doing, nonsense. So if you're going to kill time, kill it in the ibadah, use the ibadah, and do it in the ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
How about we just sunnat throughout a path? What if, like in the morning too and before?
For Fajr, Dhuhr. Yeah, those you intend the action and the salah. So you say, I pray witr. I pray sunnah of Dhuhr. I pray sunnah of Maghrib. I pray sunnah of Isha. I pray sunnah of Fajr. You intend the action, I pray, and then you intend the name of the salah.
Along with the 12
all the rawatib, the 12 raka'at, that's the second degree. And in the Shafi'i school, we said that they require the intention. This is the majority opinion. The intention has to be done at the time of the ibadah. At the time of the ibadah, this is the majority opinion. Even the Maliki school and the Hanafi school, and I believe in the Hanbali, they're the ones that say you can do it, it can precede it. But generally, the majority say the intention has to happen at the time of ibadah. You're standing for Isha, you make your intention at that moment. But I said that the Hanbali school says that there are athar that it's not necessary, because your sunnah can precede your act by some time. Your intention can precede your act by some time. So when you leave your house, you're coming to the masjid, you made an intention to pray Dhuhr at Isha at the masjid, for example. You came to the masjid, there was an intention. So that intention, they say, is sufficient. It doesn't have to be exactly the time of ibadah. It can precede it by some time. And you went to the restroom, you're making wudu, so you can pray in the masjid, right? So they said in the Hanbali school, it permits this type of intention. It permits this type of intention. And we said this is more inclined with just a natural human psychology. The human being doesn't think of what they're going to do and why at the moment they're doing it. Usually there's something that precedes it, a cause, and then you get up to perform it, and then that intention isn't done exactly at the time. Unless there's an instant response, but usually our intentions precede our behaviors, right? Usually our intentions precede our behaviors. And so I from a fiqh perspective or a practical perspective, I tell people, and I do this for my own self, I try to make the intention at the time you perform your salah. You make the intention for Asr, Isha, for example. When you come to prayer, you stand, you take a moment, calm yourself down, slow down your thoughts, make the intention, and then pray your salah. Because that's the majority opinion. That's what they require. That at the time you make your salah, you stand, calm yourself down, gather your thoughts, make your intention, pray your salah. The Shafi'i school says if verbalizing it helps you, you can verbalize it. Does that make sense? The Hanbali school says that's not necessary. If you had your intention before when you were leaving your home or when you were in the restroom, you already had made that intention. Your intention is what? Your intention is your motive, right? It's what's causing you to do this action. So you already had it. You wouldn't be here now if you don't have an intention, right? By natural, right? Human thought is what? We don't do things, everything we do is usually with an intention. The only time we have no intention is if we're children, and even children have an intention for what they're doing, right? Unless you're like mentally disabled. If you tell a person, why are you doing this? If they say, I don't know, right? It's awkward. You'll be like, maybe there's some type of disability there. Usually every human being, there's a cause behind their behavior. We don't just behave based on randomness, right? Sometimes we might behave, of course we behave based on routine. But even that routine has a cause. There's something, there's a motive, there's something, some benefit, some reason you're doing this behavior, right? And so the Hanbali school kind of says that intention is sufficient.
Yeah, but sometimes I know people come pray Dhuhr, right? But they read Fajr, read loud.
For in their intention of Fajr?
No, I don't like it. That's why the three school, right? They say make intention before what you pray.
At the time of prayer, yeah.
Like Imam Abdullahi say make intention before, but some people I know Isha and they read loud. So they make a mistake, you know.
No, I don't understand your question.
Okay, I come to Duhur, right?
Yeah.
Then I didn't make intention, just come there and, you know, because I did not make intention right the spot, you know. But I read loud, you know, like.
Oh, you read loud like as if you're in the Isha.
I thought Maghrib or Isha.
Oh.
I did not make intention, you know.
Yes, yes. So this is an interesting masala. The brother, from what I understand, he's describing the case where you pray a prayer, but you mistaken it for another salah. You pray, for example, Dhuhr or Asr, and you mistaken it for another salah. What is the ruling there? There are two scenarios. One scenario is that you're simply reading Quran out loud by mistake. You know the salah you're praying, but you know, just you thought for some reason you read Quran out loud. That happens to all of us, right? It happened. You start salah, and then you're like, oh, this is daytime. Let me read quietly. So that one, your intention is Dhuhr or Asr, but you made the mistake of reading Quran out loud. That salah is okay. Because the mistake is not about the intention. The mistake is about how you read the Quran. But now if you made a mistake with the intention, you prayed Asr, or let's say you prayed Maghrib, thinking it was Isha. You see, you prayed that salah, you were actually thinking I'm praying Isha, and then in salah you notice, no, this is Maghrib salah. What do you do in that case? You actually mistaken a prayer for another. In that case, you finish that salah, it counts for you as a sunnah, then you have to do the fard after. You have to, in that case, if you mistaken the salah for another, this isn't that you just messed up and like reading the Quran out loud or silently. You actually mistaken the salah for another. You prayed Asr thinking it was Dhuhr for you, for example. Or you prayed Dhuhr thinking it was Asr for you. Or you prayed Maghrib thinking it was Isha for you. You actually made a mistake in the salah that you were praying. You thought of the wrong prayer. Your salah is valid. You get the reward of a sunnah, but the fard doesn't count for you. Even if you prayed like everybody else, you don't get the fulfillment of the fard salah. Boys, when there's a class, no running around. Please sit down or go to the room. Thank you, boys. So in this case, when if you do mix up your intention and what salah you're trying to pray, you finish the salah as a sunnah, and then you make the fard afterwards. You make the fard afterwards, because there was a clear mistake in the intention that you made.
So that's why you say, you know, it's calm down intention, you know, that more makes sense, but you know.
You have to calm down. You have to gather your thoughts. You have to gather your thoughts. And sometimes that can lead to a bunch of intrusive thoughts, like you can overthink it. So if you get into that waswasa, is what they call it in Arabic, right? You get into this waswasa, this whispers of like, you can't seem to focus your mind. In that moment, if you're experiencing that, ignore all of it, just pray your salah. And adopt the Hanbali school. Was that you already had your intention before. And so if you're not able to concentrate, your mind is kind of scattered, just follow the Hanbali school and adopt that, and that's sufficient. Right? Because I've seen that as well. A lot of people you'll see, they're like, Allah, like they're trying very hard and they just can't focus their mind. And focusing the mind isn't easy. Lack of sleep makes it hard for you to focus your mind. That's why sleep is so important. Fatigue, it makes it hard for you to gather your focus and gather your thoughts. Just stress. If you've had a busy day, you had a stressful experience, you had a conflict, you had something, whatever, you were excited. Excitement makes it hard for you to focus your mind. So sometimes your mind can't just focus, because there are other factors that are influencing your mind. You can't seem to gather your thoughts. You try, but your mind keeps wandering and you barely can focus on what you're doing. And so in those circumstances, if you're experiencing waswas, adopt the Hanbali school and act upon that. Wallahu a'lam.
But if you're an imam, you make Muslim a great prayer, like you make this an Isha, but you pray like further out, second out, you thought, oh, I'm making this wrong. What are you going to do if you're an imam?
So if the imam makes the wrong intention, what does the imam do? I haven't read any text on this. I cannot say if I know the salah is valid for the imam. he can continue leading the salah. He will get the reward of sunnah. And in the Shafi'i school, it's permissible for somebody praying wajib to pray behind somebody praying sunnah. Does that make sense? So let's say I made a mistake in my intention of Isha. I mistakenly thought it was Maghrib. And I'm praying. And then during my prayer, I realized that, no, it's Isha time. And so what do I do in that circumstance? I finish my salah. And even if I add a fourth rak'ah, it's not a problem. Because it's sunnah. You do sunnahs in rak'at of twos, in even rak'at. You do four, you give your salam, the congregation gives their salam. You pray, the imam would pray sunnah, the congregation prayed fard. They get the reward of the fard, the imam only gets the reward of the sunnah. Then he has to do his fard afterwards. Does that make sense?
You don't need to cut off.
No, he doesn't cut off. Unless he broke his wudu or something of that sort, he doesn't get out of the salah. Because the scholars, they say, there's the difference between the intention of the imam and the mu'tameen, the followers. Does it affect the validity of the salah? The ruling, the Shafi'i opinion and the stronger opinion is that no, it doesn't, and there's a hadith of Mu'adh bin Jabal to back that up. And so therefore, if your intention is different from the imam, you're okay. Okay, let's say you enter the masjid. You didn't pray dhuhr yet, and the masjid is praying asr. What do? Pray your dhuhr, follow them in their asr salah. Right? Your intentions are different, but your salah is valid. So the intention of the imam and the mu'tameen, the followers, does not have to be exactly the same. All right? That, inshallah, hopefully is sufficient discussion about intention. We move on. I really want to get into these next parts a little bit more. These are going to be a little bit more easier, and some of it will be also very important to know. He says, rahimahullah, that the conditions of Takbirat-ul-Ihram are 16. Takbirat-ul-Ihram is the takbirah of starting the prayer. We call that Takbirat-ul-Ihram. That is the takbirah that enters you in the state of salah. So salah, to enter salah, you need two things. All the shurut, you need to have intention, and you make Takbirat-ul-Ihram, now you're in salah, right? And so he says, rahimahullah, there are 16 conditions for this takbirah. Somebody might wonder, 16 conditions? Allahu Akbar is only 2 words. So 16 conditions for 2 words, right? What are these conditions? Some of it, again, is very simple and straightforward. Some of it we'll comment on. He said, number 1, that it is pronounced while standing in the fard salah. So the fard salah, you have to be standing. And we clarified that it is wajib to stand in Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha. Any other salah, you don't have to stand. You can pray sitting down. It is sunnah. It is sunnah to stand in every other prayer except the 5. The 5, you must stand. And so if you sat down, you only get half the reward, as we mentioned, and that is mentioned in the hadith. Number 2, that it be in Arabic. And we said that the majority opinion is that the salah has to be done in Arabic. You can't add a foreign language. And this is the practice of the Muslimin globally. No community of Muslims, from what I know, has ever used a foreign language in salah. Classically, the fuqaha, hypothetically, some of them permitted using non-Arabic to make dua and other forms of dhikr. But again, none of the ummah has acted upon this. And so it has to be in Arabic. That is the position of the whole ummah. Number 3, that it be with the word Allah. That's very straightforward. You don't switch Allah with Ar-Rahman or Ar-Rahim or Al-Ilah or anything of that sort. Number 4, that it be with the word Akbar. You don't use no other. You don't say Allahu Kabir or any other form. You don't say A'zam or A'la. It has to be Allahu Akbar. Very straightforward. Number 5, the sequence between these 2 words, Allahu Akbar, is followed. There has to be the same order. Allah is first, Akbar is second. Allahu Akbar. You don't mix up the order. Number 6, not to lengthen the hamza of the word Allah. You cannot. The salah does not begin if you pronounce the a, if you stretch the a. If you say Allahu. Somebody might want to make their voice nice. They want to make their voice nice. And so what do? They say Allahu Akbar. That is wrong. You cannot stretch the hamza. You can stretch the lam. You can say Allah, but you cannot say Allah. You cannot make the hamza long. You can make the lam long. You can make the lam long. Some non-Arab speakers and those untrained sometimes make the mistake of prolonging the hamza with the intention of making their voice beautiful, and that is a major violation. You cannot do that. In Arabic, it changes the meaning. It changes a statement into a question. Allahu Akbar means Allah is the greatest. Allahu Akbar means, is Allah the greatest? It's making the statement a question. You're asking, is Allah greatest? So it completely contradicts the nature of the Takbirat-ul-Ihram. So that's why you cannot prolong the hamza. You can prolong the lam though. You can say Allahu Akbar. Fine. But not the hamza. Not the hamza. Number 7. He says not to lengthen the letter of the ba of Akbar. You don't say Akbar. I've seen this with converts sometimes, those who did not grow up in kind of with the Arabic tongue. And it's more Americans, I've seen it, not all the time, but I've seen it with some. And this is for them, there's no blame for what is beyond your control and your capability. And so if they're unable to say Allahu Akbar, they can't say Akbar, but they say Akbar. Afallahu an dhalik. May Allah forgive them. It's a mistake beyond their control, and inshallah they're forgiven. But I encourage those brothers to highly get trained under qualified scholars so they learn how to pronounce the Quran and the words of Arabic with the proper tajweed and proper makharij. That is how Sahaba learned, and that is how the Ummah learned. Right? The deen wasn't learned by watching channels and reading books. This deen was learned by studying under the feet of scholars. And right, we were developed by our teachers verbally, word for word. The Prophet ﷺ, he received the revelation from Jibreel, word for word. Every month, every year they would review. Ramadan, the Prophet ﷺ would review the whole Quran with his Shaykh, Jibreel ﷺ. Right, in modern terms, you would say that was his teacher, his ustaz, is Jibreel. And the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were being taught by Rasulullah ﷺ. He would recite it to them. They would recite it back. This Quran wasn't revealed in a written book. The Quran wasn't revealed. It was revealed orally. So this deen is learned through oral learning, through the interaction with our teachers and asatidha. We don't simply read books and watch videos and say, now I know everything I need to know about Islam. That isn't the way. And so this is a mistake that, again, converts make. If they did their best, they're excused, but it's important that they educate themselves. And sometimes, I don't know, there might be other cultures that struggle with different pronunciations, and that might be a struggle. But you have to be careful. Do not stretch the ba. It cannot be akbar, akbar, bar. You don't stretch the ba. Number 8, not to double the letter of ba. Do not put a shadda on it. Akab. That's what it means to double. You put a shadda on it. Akabbar. You can't do that. It invalidates the salah. Number 9, not to add a waw sakin or mutaharrik between these two words. To add a waw means, waw sakin or waw mutaharrik means to say Allahu is waw sakin. Or Allahu Akbar is waw mutaharrik. Do you understand? So waw sakin is a waw without a vowel, and waw mutaharrik is a waw with a vowel. So you can't do either. You can't say Allahu Akbar or Allahu Akbar. Akbar. You can't do either of those. You cannot add a waw. That's an additional letter. Number 11, not to pause for a long or short while between these two words. You don't pause between those two words. And then to hear oneself uttering its entire letters. And so this is the position of the majority of scholars, that they require you to whisper the du'as and azkar of salah to yourself. So what they require, this is very important, you have to whisper. You have to say Allahu Akbar. Enough to hear yourself. The congregation doesn't have to hear you, but the majority require you enough to hear your whisper. Another opinion, this is what I personally follow, that hearing yourself is not a requirement, only utterance is required. And this is adopted by a minority opinion, and it is a strong opinion, and there's a strong argument for it. And so what it means is, what is the difference? In the first majority opinion, that is the Shafi'i school opinion, you whisper to yourself. You whisper to yourself all of the salah. So even the Fatihah, you say, There's a silent whisper. It can be very minimum, but it has to be enough for you to hear yourself. The majority require you to hear yourself. The second opinion is that you just have to utter it with your lips and tongue, but you don't have to hear yourself. And that's more in line with silent speech. Now the first one, there's actually a hadith to back it up. There's actually a hadith to back it up. And so I do encourage we practice that as best as we can, but we can adopt the second opinion as an ease. That if you don't hear yourself, it is sufficient to just utter it. A mistake that some people make, they say it with their heart and thoughts, but not with their lips. They don't utter the words. That is invalid according to all. Salah has to be verbal. You have to say it. You can't think it. If you think it, it doesn't count. It doesn't count. You have to move your lips. You have to move your tongue. There has to be an utterance. It cannot be simple thought. Is that clear? It cannot be simple thought. And so that is what he means by the condition of number 12. To hear oneself uttering its entire letters. Number 13, to entering the time of salah. And we talked about this. When you make Takbirat-ul-Ihram, you have to make sure the time of salah has entered. You cannot guess. You cannot assume. You have to have certain knowledge that Asr has come in, Maghrib has come in, Isha has come in. You don't assume. You don't assume. That's very important. And you don't say estimation. Oh, it's only 1 minute till Adhan, I'm going to pray. Don't estimate. You wait till the actual prayer time begins. You can't say, oh, just Takbirat-ul-Ihram, I did the rest of it in the right time. Not valid. The entire salah must happen during the time of salah. Is that clear? Yeah. Number 14, he says, for it to occur while facing towards the Qibla. So the entire salah must be while you're facing towards the Qibla. Number 15, to not change even a single letter. So you can't change any letter of it. And number 16, to delay the takbir of the ma'moom till after the takbir of the imam. Your takbir cannot happen before the takbir of the imam. It has to happen after. Otherwise, you started your salah before the imam. How are you going to follow somebody after you already started your prayer? It can't happen. So you have to make sure your takbir doesn't occur until after the takbir of the imam. Most of us, we already do this correctly. It's very clear and simple. Say Allahu Akbar. Try to whisper it to yourself silently if you can, and if you don't, just make sure you utter it. That's the description. Easy. Allahu Akbar. Don't change it, don't prolong it, don't do anything you're not supposed to, and try to whisper it to yourself. Alright, now the shurut of Fatiha. Fatiha has 10 requirements. And so we're going to read these conditions fairly quickly. He says, rahimahullah, the conditions of Surah Al-Fatiha are 10. Number 1, sequence. You must read the ayat in the correct order. Number 2, continuity. Meaning, you cannot pause between the ayat. You can't read 3-4 ayat, stop for a while, and then read another 3 ayat. It has to be continuous. It has to be continuous. The only time you can take a break, there are a couple situations where you could pause. One is you sneeze and you say Alhamdulillah. You can do that. If you sneeze, you can say Alhamdulillah in Salah, and then you continue your Fatiha. Or the Imam says Ameen, you can interrupt your Fatiha and say Ameen and then continue. Right? Other than that, you shouldn't interrupt your tilawah of Fatiha. The tilawah of Fatiha must be continuous. It cannot be interrupted. Any questions regarding that? Is that clear? Straightforward? Okay. Number 3, to perfect pronunciation of its letters. And we're going to talk about Fatiha and the pronunciation of Fatiha's letters. I have found that most non-Arabs have a major accent with some letters of Fatiha that would invalidate the salah if it was done out of carelessness. But if it's done just because they're unable to say it, la bas. But Fatiha's letters have to be pronounced correctly, and a lot of people do not pronounce their Fatiha correctly while they're able to. And that's again why it's important to learn the Quran under scholars. And we'll talk about the pronunciations of Fatiha inshallah very soon. Number 5, he says, Not to pause for a long or short time while with the intention of terminating the recitation. So you don't pause and you don't intend to terminate the recitation. Number 6, reciting all of its verses, including the Basmala. You must recite the Basmala with the Fatihah. Right? The Maliki school is the only school, and not the entire Maliki school. Some of the Malikiya, they don't read the Basmala or Fatiha at all. They just go into Alhamdulillah. But and so many of the Malikiya, they argued against that, and they said, no, Basmala should be read. Although they don't see it as a requirement, they still encourage it. Others have said they don't even encourage the Basmala be read at all. It's a very minority opinion. The majority of our scholars require the Basmala, and the Shafi'i school, the majority of our scholars encourage the Basmala, and the Shafi'i school, the Basmala is required. It is an ayah of Fatiha. Number 7, not to commit a mistake that alters the meaning. You cannot make a mistake that alters the meaning of the letter, of the ayat. And some of that could be, for example, you leave a shadda on iyaka. Instead of saying iyaka, you say iyaka. Iyaka means light. So iyaka means light. Iyaka means only you. So if you say iyaka instead of iyaka, it changes the meaning. You can't do that. It would make your Fatiha invalid. Number 8, to recite it while standing in the fard salah. Fatiha has to be read while standing. Number 9, to hear one's own recitation. And we talked about, hearing versus utterance, or whisper versus utterance. Number 10, no foreign dhikr or recitation should be recited in between al-Fatiha. And we said the only 2 dhikrs that you can recite between al-Fatiha is Ameen, if the Imam says Ameen, and if you sneeze, you say Alhamdulillah. That's it. No other foreign dhikr should be said. Do you say Subhanallah if the Imam makes a mistake while reciting Fatiha? I don't recall the text on that. I would have to actually double check that. But for sneezing and for Ameen, you say. Other than that, no other dhikr should interrupt your Fatiha. And there shouldn't be a gap between the ayat of al-Fatiha. Next, the author, rahimahullah, he talks about, and this part is very important, and I'm going to demonstrate inshallah. He says, there are 14 tashdeeds. What are tashdeeds? Tashdeeds are shaddas, what we commonly know as shaddas. Shaddas are the little W's, right? The little W's. If you guys want to follow, I would say open the Fatiha app or surah on your phone and you can follow along. I'm going to demonstrate. He says there are 14 shaddas, or you can open the Mus'haf and check the shaddas. There are 14 shaddas in Fatiha. There are 14 shaddas in Fatiha that are recited on various words of Al-Fatiha, which are demonstrated in the following diagram. So he gives a diagram. He underlines each word that has a shadda on it. And so the shaddas are the Allah, the Lam on the word of Lafz al-Jalala, Allah, Ar-Rahman, and Ar-Rahim. There's 3 there. Lillah has 1. Rabbil has 1. What does a shadda do before I continue? What does a shadda do? A shadda is equivalent to 2 letters. I wish we don't have a whiteboard here, but I will try to explain as best as I can. A shadda is equivalent to 2 letters. I'll give you an example. For example, let's say you say ab. You say what? Ab, right? And then there's ab. And then after ab is ba. Ba. Ab, ba. What does the shadda do? It takes the 2 bas. You see how the first word had a ba on the end, right? Ab. It has an ab or ba on the end. And the second word, ba, has a ba in the beginning. Shadda erases one of those 2 bas, the first one, and it just puts a W on top, the shadda mark on top. And that shadda mark is telling you there's 2 bas here, but we're only writing 1. So instead of saying abba, you just say abba. Does that make sense? Instead of saying ab and ba as separate words, you say it together. Abba. Does that make sense? Is that clear? That's what a shadda does. Shadda has 2 letters. So you have to pronounce every shadda. Because if you don't say the shadda, you skip the letter. If you only say abba instead of abba, you skip the first ba. Does that make sense? If you just say aba instead of abba, you skip the first ba. So you have to say the shadda. So there are 14 shaddas. If you skip any of them, that means you skipped a letter of Fatiha. If you skip a letter of Fatiha, your salah is invalid. Because the Prophet ﷺ says, there is no salah for anyone who does not recite al-Fatiha. So that means the whole Fatiha, right? So that's kind of where the shadda is coming from, right? And so here the author, rahimahullah, he says, the shaddas are, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. You hold the lam, you hold the ra, and you hold the ra. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. You don't say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. A lot of non-Arab, and I hear this more with those with the English accent, who a lot of converts. The Arabic is a very foreign language. Those born Muslim, they grow up in madrasa, so even if Arabic is not their language, they were trained to pronounce the shadda. But in English, the shadda is not a common sound. It doesn't really exist in the English language where you put pressure on a letter. You don't, Bismillah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. That emphasis on a letter doesn't exist too much in English, if any at all. And so for English, not a Muslim converts, they struggle making those sounds. And again, if they do their best, khalas, there's no burden. But they should and must seek knowledge under qualified teachers, right? So the shadda has to be pronounced. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is not valid. Is not valid unless they're unable to do it the correct way. Then, may Allah forgive their mistake. And a person that reads the Quran like that should not lead the salah. The imam who's leading the salah has to be someone who can pronounce the Fatiha correctly. That's the requirement. So if a person knows their Fatiha is not proper, they shouldn't be leading the salah. Their salah is valid for them, but it isn't valid for them to lead others since their pronunciation of Fatiha is incorrect. Right? So with the Bismillah, for example, you don't say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. You gotta roll the R, you gotta put emphasis on the lam. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And then Alhamdu has a shadda on Lillah and Rabbi. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil. You hold the ba. Rabbil Alameen. Some people, again, you find the accent of Rabbil Alameen. Rabbil Alameen. Again, they're excused if that's their best they can do, but it isn't correct. They're mispronouncing the Quran. So they have to make sure they study with qualified teachers and get trained to pronounce the Fatiha. I spent over an hour after studying the Quran and memorizing portion of it, learning and correcting my Fatiha with my shaykh. And many years after, getting my pronunciation corrected. And so it's important, and this isn't just for scholars. Every Muslim should learn to pronounce the Quran correctly and have a qualified teacher. And so it's important to find good teachers to teach us the proper pronunciation of Al-Fatiha. Rabbil Alameen, the shadda on the back. Rabbil Alameen is not okay unless that's all they can do. Then again, fear Allah. The rule in Sharia is what? Fear Allah as best as you can. Fear Allah as best as you can. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. And so here you put a shadda on the ra of Rahman and the ra of Ar-Rahim. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. You hold the ra. And then Yawmiddin, Maliki Yawmiddin on the dal. Maliki Yawmiddin. Yawmiddin. Right? Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Shadda on the two yas. Iyyaka. If you just say Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, you change the whole meaning of the ayah. Because Iyyaka means light. Iyyaka means only you, Ya Allah, we worship. Iyyaka means light we worship. Completely different meaning. Completely. So it's important to get the shaddas correctly. It changes the meaning in many cases. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. And then the shadda on the sad. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. So you hold the sad. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. Next, the Zelle. صراط الذين, sorry, the lam. صراط الذين. صراط You see how you hold the lam? صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم. And then the last one has two shaddas on the dad and the lam. Walad and dalin. And this is the shadda that I find the most mistake. Those who grew up in Muslim families and those who didn't, I find this mistake very common. People don't hold the lam. This is very common. I found it with all types of people. Waladallin. The lam must be held. There's a shad. If you just say waladallin, waladallin, you left the shadda out. You cannot do that. It is impermissible and could invalidate the salah if done out of carelessness. And so, waladallin, waladall. Practice holding it. That's the shadda. The shadda is to hold the letter. Ar, lil, yawmid. Does that make sense? Siratal. The shadda, you're holding the letter. So all the letters that have the shadda, practice holding it. And I would highly encourage to get a teacher who has the proper training in tajweed and the and of the Quran, and with the proper makharij and pronunciations of the Quran, and to learn it from them. You don't have to have a beautiful voice, but you just have to recite the Quran with the proper tajweed and proper pronunciations. Any questions about Fatiha before we continue? I think it was very straightforward. Most of it, I think most of it we say correctly. If there's any mistake, it might be on the lam. Some of us who maybe did not grow up with the Arabic language as part of our life, it might be a little harder to pronounce the shaddas, especially if we were just only English speaking. English doesn't really have the concept of shadda, so it takes a lot more training for those people to correct their mistakes, and they have a greater reward. Right, those who are experts of the Quran, they're with the malaika, but those who struggle and they have this struggle for them, they get two rewards: a reward for reading Quran and a reward for their effort and struggle. And so they get an enormous reward, and it's a great honor, right? And so those who did not grow up with the proper Arabic language or who did not have that pronunciation correct, they should definitely seek it. But I encourage everybody, learn the Quran with a shaykh. We don't learn the Quran. This deen was never taught by simply reading books. This deen was always taught from teacher to student, teacher to student. It was passed on through relationships and not through textbooks. But continuing on page 57, here the author, rahimahullah, he talks about the places, and we talked about all this, but I'll just go over it quickly. He says this: it is sunnah to raise the hands in 4 places. 4 times you should raise your hand in salah. They are, number 1, Takbirat-ul-Ihram, when you start the salah, Allahu Akbar. Number 2, when you go to ruku', Allahu Akbar. Number 3, in i'tidal, when you rise, Sami Allahu liman hamidah. And number 4, when you get up from, what did we say that night? Who remembers? The tashahhud, yes. When you get up from the tashahhud, not when you get up from sujood. When you get up from sujood and you stand, you just go back to your chest. But when you get up from the tashahhud, then you say Allahu Akbar. So 4 times we raise our hands, otherwise we don't. Hanafi school, they discourage raising the hands at all. They discourage raising the hands at all. So for the Hanafi brothers, they don't raise their hands. And there's a reason. They have a good argument, but the hadith outweighs that. Their reason is salah, you're not supposed to move a lot. One of the reasons. There's other reasons. So they say moving your hands abundantly contradicts the nature of salah. You're moving your hands too much, right? So there's a lot of wisdom in how our scholars think. They just think differently sometimes. But each opinion is valid and can be adopted. But the majority opinion is that you move your hands, and you move your hands in those positions. Here quickly, the author, rahimahullah, he talks about the conditions of sujood. Sujood. What are the conditions of doing sujood? The conditions of doing sujood are 7. Number 1, to prostrate upon 7 limbs. On the bottom of the book, the author says 7 limbs are what? Your forehead. And this is very important. Pay attention, please. Your forehead includes forehead and nose. Sujood upon only the forehead is invalid. salah doesn't count. The sujood must be done with the forehead and nose together. In Arabic, the word is jabha. Jabha means nose and forehead together. So the translation doesn't do it justice. And so it's very important that when we make sujood, the sujood of Islam is a sujood on the forehead and a sujood of the nose. And then the other 7 limbs are both the palms, the knees, and the portion under the toes of each feet. So we said you curve the toes in a bit. So those are the 7 limbs of sujood. Going back to number 2, the forehead should be exposed. Part of your forehead needs to show according to the Shafi'i school and many of our scholars. Other schools have permitted covering the forehead. And so the safest and the strongest opinion is what? The forehead has to be exposed. You cannot have your hat like this and pray your salah. Sometimes I see imams with a full big turban like this, covering their forehead. That is incorrect and invalid. The imam's forehead and the congregation, but especially the imam, because the entire community is praying behind him. But it's important, wajib for everyone. The forehead, part of the forehead must show. It doesn't have to be the whole thing, but part of the forehead must show. And this is for both men and women. They must touch the ground with their forehead and nose. And this means what? You cannot wear a mask when you pray. You cannot cover your forehead and nose when you pray. A woman cannot pray with niqab on her face when she prays. The forehead and nose must be exposed. Other limbs can be covered. It is sunnah, it is better to uncover your hands, but not wajib. So if you wore gloves in prayer, your salah is valid. Of course, we all have pants on as part of covering the awrah, and the feet, of course, is permissible. But the forehead and nose must be uncovered. Even if a woman wears niqab, she must take it off when she prays salah, unless it's in the difficult circumstance where she's praying in a public space. And then number 3, he says to make the sajdah by resting on the head. Meaning you have to let your head rest. You can't just touch the floor and get up right away. Number 4, not to intend anything but the sajdah. You can't intend to go down for any other reason. If you intended to go down, like the kid is about to get hurt, and then you just go for sujood, it doesn't count. Your intention has to be sajdah alone. Number 5, not to prostrate on something that moves with one's own movement. So you cannot make sujood. We said your forehead has to be exposed. Part of that means you make sujood on the ground. Anything on your body, you can't make sujood on. So if you have a big imama for a man, or a big hijab for a woman, she cannot or he cannot let that be rest on the ground. Maybe the ground is dirty and you just put your part of her hijab down, or you have an imam and you just kind of stretch it and you can't do that. The sujood has to be done on the ground. Nothing on your body should be used for you to make sujood on. Is that clear? And then number 6, he says that one rears be higher than one's head. So this is the rear, the behind, be higher than your head. And this is in the case, subhanAllah, a very unique circumstance. If you're praying in a position, maybe you're praying on a bed where your knees are sinking in, or maybe an uneven floor or something that's wobbly, very rare circumstance. Your head must always be lower than your rear. That's just a requirement for those rare circumstances. Number 7, remain motionless for a moment whilst prostrating. You have to be still in that position. And we talked about the limbs of sujood. And so, inshallah, we'll suffice with that. We want to conclude this actually, and then we'll get. All right, so number 5, the brother asked for clarification on number 5. So you cannot prostrate on something that moves with one's own movement. So let's say the ground is dirty, and as I'm making sujood, I extend out my thobe, and I make sujood on my thobe. You cannot do that. You cannot make sujood on something that is moving with you, even if it's something big. Like sometimes you go in the morning, they have those big. Men will have those big scarves, right? You can't make sujood on anything that you're wearing. It has to be something independent that's on the floor that you're making sujood on. You can put as many things as you want on the floor, but you can't make sujood on something that you're actually wearing, that's on you, that's moving with you. Is that clear?
Yeah, like you get a jacket, you cannot take out a jacket.
No, you can take it off, because the jacket is not moving with you in salah.
Okay.
So you have to take it off. But if it's moving with you in salah, you're praying and you have the jacket on, and now you want to put the jacket out, you can't do that. Does that make sense? But if you want to take it off completely and pray on it, that's okay. That's a good clarification, right? You can take it off completely, but you can't make sujood on it while wearing it. While wearing it, you can't do it. You had a question?
Yes. I pray one masjid. I don't know if it's Shia masjid.
Yes.
They have rocks. Yes.
It's a Shia masjid, the rocks.
One up. Sujood on this carpet.
Yeah, that's the Shia. Yeah, that's the Shia. They have the rocks. I don't know why, and I don't know too much about the Shia madhab, but they have those practices, and so alhamdulillah, the Shia are a very small minority. They make up less than 10% of the ummah, so let them be. And alhamdulillah, we have countless masajid that are sunnah, so it's sufficient. The Masjid Abu Bakr, our masjid is called Masjid Omar, So it's Sunni, because only Sunnah will name their masjid after Sayyidina Umar and Abu Bakr, So find a masjid, inshallah, and Bismillah. But there's no burden. If that's how they pray, let them pray the way they pray. La bas. We not la bas, but we don't have the authority to enforce otherwise. And so you go pray, and you let them do what they do, and everybody is responsible to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. The next section is, we're on page 59, inshallah. I want to complete this section that talks about these little particulars of salah. He says here, there are 21 tashdeeds that are recited in tashahhud. 5 are their completion, and 16 are minimal of the tashahhud. All are demonstrated in the following diagram. So the tashahhud has 16 shaddas. Remember, we said shadda is equivalent to 2 letters, so we have to pronounce the shaddas. The most common mistake I find in the shadda that I've taught, and I see this too often, is people say at-tahyatul mubarakatu. It's not at-tahyatu, it's at-tahiyyatu. There is a shadda there, and to skip that shadda would invalidate the salah. And so it's important, and this is in all schools, this is just Arabic language, it's at-tahiyyatu. We don't say at-tahyatu, that is a major mistake. So at-tahiyyatu lillah. In the Maliki school, what is it? At-tahiyyatu lillahi wa-zakiyatu. Is it like that? Wat-tayyibatu lillah, like that? Okay. So so there's different forms. The Malikiyya add az-zakiyat, that's narrated from Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, as I recall. Others, the Shafi'iyya, they prefer at-tahiyyatu mubarakatu salawatu tayyibatu lillah. That's also narrated in the third. We said it's at-tahiyyatu lillahi wa salawatu wa tayyibat, and I believe that's the Hanafi school. And I think Hanbali school prefer this version as well. All are valid. The salah is okay in all forms, as long as you read one of them, and as long as you read the shaddas correctly. So there are 16 shaddas. What are they? At-tahiyyatu is number 1. As-salawatu is number 2 with the sad. Number 3, at-tayyibatu. And lillah is number 4. Lillah. As-salamu is number 5 on the scene. As-salamu. A lot of people today, they say salamu alaykum. It's not salamu alaykum. It's as-salamu alaykum. In your greeting, if you make the mistake, it's not a big deal. Okay, khalas, no big deal. But in the salah, when you read your tashahhud, you cannot say salamu alayka ayyuhan nabi. You have to say as-salamu alayka ayyuhan nabiyyu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Is that clear? All right. And then you say ayyuhan nabiyyu. Ayyu with the shadda on the ya. Ayyu. And then the shadda on the noon. An ayyuhan. And then the shadda on the ya. An nabiyyu. Ayyuhan nabiyyu. I taught this book to my high schoolers, and we did like a whole weekend where we were just practicing the tashahhud and Fatihah and making sure they were pronouncing everything correctly. And so, inshallah, again, go to a teacher. I'm available sometimes, and if you can find a teacher of your own, inshallah, that's great. It's important that we all strive to learn the deen. I was talking to one brother a while back, and we were talking about the importance of knowledge. And subhanAllah, he said something that I found very profound, He said, Islam without knowledge is without substance. Like substance, what he's saying is like, knowledge is what makes your Islam strong. If you have your knowledge, your Islam is just this thing that's very weak, flimsy, right? It's not steady, it's not firm. Why? Because there's no knowledge. Think of somebody, living, but you have no mass. Meaning you're very, very thin, undernourished. Are you living properly? No. Knowledge is like that. You're Muslim, but you don't have knowledge. It's like, yes, you're Muslim, but you're so malnourished. You're lacking the substance that makes you a Muslim, that makes you a whole Muslim, that fulfills your being. And so it's very, very important to pursue the knowledge of this deen and to make it a priority in our lives. Okay, continue with the shaddas. Wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alayna wa ala ibadillahi as-salihin. And then ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. And so we know that Muhammad, people a lot of times make a mistake with Muhammad. They say Muhammad. It's not Muhammad. It's Muhammad or Muhammad. Muhammad. It's not Muhammad. It's Muhammad with a shadda on the meme. You have to say the shadda. وَأَشْهَدُ أَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. And then he said the tashdidat of at-tashahhud, the minimum is for Allahumma ala lam, and then salli ala on top of the sad, on top of the lam, salli. And then the salli, you don't make the lam long. You don't say salli, you make it short. Salli. Salli. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. And then the last part is that the minimum, there are 4 tashdeeds for the minimum salah upon the Nabi. We mentioned that. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And then he says the minimum salam is assalamu alaykum. The minimum salah, salam for your salah to be valid is to say assalamu alaykum. Wa rahmatullahi is sunnah. To turn your face to the right is sunnah. To do a second salam is sunnah. The minimum salam is assalamu alaykum. And then that is the end of this part. Inshallah, next we're going to get into the times of prayer. The times of prayer, inshallah ta'ala. We will start that tomorrow night. I do want to add one final thing about Fatiha. Not about the shaddas, but about the pronunciations of Fatiha. What are the most common mistakes that are here in Fatiha? There are some common mistakes, and these mistakes differ from community to community, ethnic group to ethnic group. Within some ethnic groups, the mistake that I hear is on the hat, especially Americans. Because in English, there's no hat sound. We just have H, which is more like a ha sound, right? So hat and handy and whatever, Howard and whatever, it's as a hat sound. This hat sound, it doesn't exist in English. And so for English speakers that are born here and raised here, even those born to Muslim families, they don't know oftentimes they don't know how to say the hat correctly. And that is a major violation. That is not allowed. They have to practice and do their best to pronounce the hat correctly. Children are very careless when they're children. I've taught children, I know there are students that I teach, and I probably taught them how to say the hat correctly over 100 times. And they still say it wrong. And so children are careless. They're going to grow and learn, and you guide them as much as you can. But as adults, we have to be mindful and check ourselves and see, are we pronouncing the hat correctly? So the Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. We have to make sure on the Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, both in the Basmala and both in the the ayah, we say it correctly. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim is not Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. That is wrong. That is wrong. That is wrong. That is not the letter in that ayah. Not Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. All right? Major mistake. Another mistake that I hear in Fatiha that is very common is on the ta. And I hear this in different cultures. They might say it differently. I know as a Somali that I hear very often, Siradal Ladina. Ihdina Siradal Mustaqim. And there's no da. It's not a dad. The dad is Sirada. Dad walad dalin. The ta is a ta. Is a ta. You're placing your teeth on your tongue on the upper front teeth. Siratal ladina. Sound. So I hear that mistake with my Somali folks. Oftentimes they say Siratal ladina. Ihdina Siradal Mustaqim. Siratal ladina an'amta alayhim. Major mistake. It is not allowed. and we have to make sure to correct that. And I don't want to like name ethnic groups to kind of like, put anybody down. If you're non-Arab, these sounds are not natural to you. And so sometimes we pronounce things incorrect based on just how we grow up and the nature of our mother tongue. So it isn't to put anybody down, but it's to kind of bring awareness, to kind of look at, okay, my community, like what do we usually say wrong? And maybe I'm saying these words wrong. Other communities that I hear, al-ladhina. Al-ladhina, people say it two ways. There are those that say al-lazina. There are those that say al-lazina, very common in a lot of East Asian countries, even in a lot of parts of Africa. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. صراط الذين الذين. That is wrong. It's not al-lazina. There's no zai there. It's a dal. Al-ladhina. Dina. Dina. Others make the mistake of converting the dina, the dal, to a dal. Sirat al-ladina, ladina, ladina. And that's also wrong.
So how about people who have problems for the time?
They do their best and learn with a teacher. That is my advice. First, learn with a teacher. And then your teacher will tell you, khalas, this is enough. He's going to get tired. He's going to be like, listen, Sheikh, you did your best. Go. You're fine, right? So when you have to learn, you have to make that attempt, right? So, and that's why it's highly encouraged with Quran especially to kind of learn this with a teacher. If we had the time, if I had the availability, I would make myself available. We could spend a couple nights doing this, but we're restricted on time, and I'm very limited on time. But I encourage you guys to reach out to a teacher. If you see me in the message sometimes and you catch me and you're like, can I read? And it's like, it's fine, I can give you some time, inshallah. But inshallah, find a teacher and make sure. So, al-ladhina is a common one. It's not al-lazina, it's not al-ladina. It's al-ladhina. Dhina. Try that sound. It's a buzzing sound that's coming by rubbing your tongue with your upper teeth. Dhina. Right? Your tongue stands out, it sticks out a little bit. Sirat al-ladhina. Ladhina. All right? Ladhina. Not ladina, not lazina. Not neither of those. That one is very, very, very common in so many different ethnic groups and cultures. I see this letter mispronounced. The last one, we said the ta, we said the zal, we said the ta, the zal, dad. I think the dad, usually people say, okay, wala da, the dad, I don't hear a problem. It's the shadda on the lam. Wala dallin. Holding the shadda on the lam. Wala dallin. Hold the shadda on the lam. And inshallah, those are common mistakes of Fatihah that have come to my mind right now. Pronounce it. Check yourself. Go to the mirror. Refer to this recording. See what I was given instructions. See how well you're able to pronounce it, inshallah. It's a good practice, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We conclude with that. وجزاكم الله خير وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والحمد لله رب العالمين.